Microdosing is when you derive the maximum benefit from taking the minimum effective dose. This is how you minimize unwanted effects. People microdose for many different reasons: mental health, wellness, or performance. I microdose to sleep better because your girl is perpetually overworked and tired. Today's podcast is sponsored by Microdose Gummies and Lumi Labs. Microdose Gummies deliver perfect entry-level doses of THC that help you feel just the right amount of good. I love this company and personally use their products. My day job takes a lot out of me, and I invest all my free time into producing this show, so I take microdose gummies on the weekends so I can catch up on sleep. The gummies are organic, infused with real fruit, gluten-free, and they taste good. Microdose is available nationwide. To learn more about microdosing THC, go to microdose.com and use code BEYOND to get free shipping and 30% off your first order. Links can be found in the show description. But again, that's microdose.com, code BEYOND.
This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. I went to college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the mid to late 90s. My first 2 years, I lived in the Lakeshore dorms and also on Howard Place off Langdon Street. Because I'm a nature girl, and I wanted to live by the lake, even though it was so green that you didn't even want to touch the water. Then the next 2 years, I lived at 2 different houses on North Pinckney Street, and my 5th year, I lived on North Francis Street by the Coal Center. One consistent thing that you could always count on as a UW student was that you were likely to encounter homeless and transient people, especially in certain areas of downtown and around the Capitol Square. There are no two ways about it. Homeless folks and people on drugs were and are a way of life in Madison, Wisconsin. But this is not limited to the downtown. I had an incident a few years ago when a drug-addled man chased me to my car in the parking lot of Willie Co-op North. It scared the hell out of me. Sadly, I had more than a handful of experiences like this in the capital city. Many students choose to live around the Capitol Square or over on Doty, Bedford, Main, or Wilson Street, because even though they are farther away from campus, they're cheaper. And Madison is an expensive place to live. Those areas were mostly students renting houses and apartments. But some of those rentals were also halfway homes or drug houses. It's a mixed bag. The victim in this case lived on West Doty Street, and she had about the unluckiest, most unbelievable encounter with a drug-addled, paranoid, schizophrenic, transient man. She paid the ultimate price. You're listening to episode 81, Brittany Zimmermann. 21-year-old Brittany Zimmermann had just finished an exam and headed home to make lunch, which was her typical weekday routine. 22-year-old Jordan Gonnering was Brittany's fiancé, and he was still in class. They were both students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and shared a first-floor apartment on 517 West Doty Street in downtown Madison. For those familiar with that section of town, their rental was between the Echo Tap and Brittingham Dog Park, close to Lake Monona and Monona Bay. Jordan came home that afternoon and found Brittany on the floor. He frantically dialed 911 around 1 p.m. on Wednesday, April 2nd, 2008. Police quickly arrived and determined that Brittany had been murdered. They initially considered Jordan a suspect, but he was nothing short of cooperative. He was quickly dropped off the investigator suspect list. Officials were tight-lipped about the extent of Brittany's injuries. They performed an autopsy on the following day. The only thing that Dane County Coroner John Stanley would say was that Brittany Zimmermann died from a complexity of traumatic injuries. But there was a source who was close to the investigation that leaked to the local newspaper that Brittany had been stabbed. Madison residents were scared. This type of crime was not typical for the city. It was so bold and brazen to take place in the middle of the day. But this had been a concerning time for Madison. Brittany's murder had been the 5th unsolved homicide that took place in less than a year. Understandably, this had heightened community concerns over safety. Police told students and residents to take common-sense precautions and to remember to lock their doors. Officers were called in from the Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation. They helped with the evidence gathering and patrolled Brittany's neighborhood. Investigators even shut down all the traffic on West Doty Street. Anyone who came into that area had their identification checked. Thursday's trash collection was stopped, so investigators could look through the garbage for any clues. The Doty-Bassett Main Street part of Madison was in the downtown area and was a few blocks from the Capitol. It was also on the far end of where many students lived. The area was an interesting mixture of older rental houses, apartments, and even multi-million-dollar condos. Some of these areas of downtown were safe, but over the years, the presence of transient and homeless people who were sometimes on drugs was becoming more commonplace. These individuals often cut through the Doty-Bassett Street neighborhood as they went from State Street to Monona Bay to either Brittingham Park near Meritor Hospital or Law Park over by Machinery Row Bikes. Many of these transient people were not violent criminals, but often engaged in aggressive panhandling. They would ask people passing by in the streets for money, or even knock on doors. This was where the Madison police were putting their efforts. Whether someone in these communities committed the crime, or perhaps they were a witness to something. On the same day of the murder, there was a smaller incident that happened in a rental house shared by several UW students. Over on the 500 block of West Washington Street, 4 people left the house and failed to lock the door. There was at least one student home when a stranger walked in the door. The student told the intruder to leave, and luckily, the intruder complied, which was the end of the incident. The investigators were examining to see if there was any connection to Brittany's murder. Brittany's parents were Jean and Kevin Zimmermann. She also had a younger brother, Matthew, who was only 16. When Brittany Zimmermann was a freshman at Marshfield High School, she knew she wanted to go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Brittany was confident that she wanted to become a doctor. In high school, she took 8 AP classes, was in the National Honor Society, and graduated in the top 10% of her class in 2005. Brittany juggled academics with band, Spanish club, and volunteer work at the American Cancer Society Hope Lodge. She was never a risk taker and never got into any kind of trouble. Her parents didn't know what they did to deserve such an amazing kid. For her freshman year at UW, Brittany lived in Whitty Hall, in the heart of campus in downtown Madison. Her house fellow said she was an amazing person who had her head on straight. The house fellow called classmates who knew Brittany and let them know of her passing. Most students were completely shocked. At UW, she majored in medical microbiology and immunology, which was a very competitive program. Brittany made the dean's list in fall 2005 and spring 2006. She did this while working for the campus registrar's office. Brittany worked there 3 years, but had taken the semester off because her classes were so difficult. She planned on working there again in the summer. Brittany planned to graduate in spring 2009. After her bachelor's, she wanted a master in public health and ultimately wanted an MD in infectious disease. Brittany's fiancé, Jordan Gonerang, transferred to UW so they could be together. He was the love of her life, and they planned to get married in Hawaii. Brittany's MySpace page described her interests as my boyfriend, my cats, hanging out with friends, reading books and articles about infectious disease, and cooking. On Sunday, April 6, 2008, students held a memorial vigil on Library Mall, which was the place where the university and the city of Madison converged. On April 11th, 2008, investigators confirmed that Brittany's killer broke through her front door, as there was evidence of forced entry. It had been just over a week since Brittany was murdered, and police had a major crackdown when they arrested about 24 mostly homeless and transient men, but none had been identified as suspects in her murder. Another week passed, and police identified a potential witness who was being held at the Dane County Jail. 42-year-old David Kahl was the individual who walked into that unlocked West Washington home on April 2nd, but left when he was confronted. He was arrested for criminal trespass and theft by fraud. Kahl told investigators that he and 2 men had been running scams and entering houses. Kahl claimed that they had not been working together. David Kahl did not have an innocent past. He was a convicted sex offender who raped his girlfriend in 1993. He pleaded no contest and had served a year in prison. In January 2007, they sentenced him to prison time for drinking and driving and for a sex offender registry case because he failed to register as a sex offender. They released him on December 26, 2007. Kahl spent time at a halfway house and looked for work. He was also medicated for paranoid schizophrenia that he was diagnosed with in 2005, but he stopped taking the medications and thought he didn't need them anymore. Kahl told police he entered a home close to Brittany's apartment, and there were 2 other men named Hank and Mitchell. Kahl said he took drugs at a crack house on Wilson Street with Hank and Mitchell on the day of the murder, but they went their separate ways. He said the 2 men were going into unlocked homes and grabbing items like laptops or cell phones. Kahl worked with a police sketch artist to create a composite of the men. He even took police to a homeless shelter to see if he could find Hank or Mitchell there. Kahl was no stranger to scamming people. Besides asking for money to repair his car and spending it on crack cocaine, he used drugs, drank alcohol, wrote bad checks, and had someone impersonate his mother so he could withdraw money from her bank account. And he did all these things while on probation. A few days later, on April 15th, Kahl's extended supervision status was revoked for his failure to register as a sex offender and his 5th drunken driving conviction. The following month, the judge sentenced him to at least another year in prison. Investigators didn't believe Kahl had any direct knowledge of the murder, and they did not consider him a suspect. But the police had a few other transient men that they were looking at. 48-year-old Jeffrey Ball was found with a knife in a woman's bathroom in Butler Plaza, a few blocks off the Capitol Square on the night of Brittany's murder. He threatened an employee, so the police were called, and he had to be tased. Another suspect was a 51-year-old British man named Thomas Cosgrove, who was found sleeping in the student lounge on the 5th floor of Vilas Hall in his underwear a week before Brittany was murdered. He was drinking, speaking nonsense, and he had a knife. On May 1st, 2008, very sad and disturbing news was reported. Brittany called 911 before she was stabbed to death, but the Dane County 911 call center made a few significant errors. When Brittany called, the 911 operator did not dispatch the police to her location, and they did not accurately tell the police about her call after she was found murdered. When detectives examined Brittany's phone records and realized she called a 911 dispatcher, they asked the 911 call center to investigate why the call was mishandled. Joe Norwick was the director of the Dane County 911 Center, and he declined to comment to the press. He said the Madison Police Department asked him to withhold all information related to Brittany Zimmermann's murder, to not compromise the investigation. But the Madison police said they only wanted the time of the call and what they heard on the call to be withheld from the public. They did not ask the 911 center to deny that the call existed. As the story unfolded, this became the battle of 2 departments. Police Chief Noble Ray said there was evidence on the 911 call that required an officer be sent to Brittany's location. But Joe Norwick of the 911 center claimed the dispatcher heard nothing and therefore did not dispatch an officer. Brittany and the 911 operator had been disconnected during the call. When anyone called 911 and hung up or couldn't be understood, the dispatcher was supposed to call them back. Norwick said the dispatcher got busy with other calls and failed to call Brittany Zimmermann back. He said the call center received many accidental calls. On the day Brittany was murdered, they received 115 hang-up calls, with 83 of those from cell phones. Norwick added that the Madison police told the call center to not dispatch officers for cell phone hang-ups because there was too much difficulty in finding those addresses. The police chief disagreed with the statement and said the 911 center had the technology to track cell phone locations. Kathleen Falk was the county's executive and admitted that the 911 center had modern technology, but sometimes the precision with cell phone calls was variable. When individuals hung up from landlines, dispatchers would get an address on their display, and police were automatically dispatched. Cell phone calls didn't display the caller's address. Kathleen Falk asked Joe Norwick to contact the Association of Public Safety Communications officials to review the incident and the center's general performance. The 911 center's incorrect information cost the Madison police 2 weeks of following an inaccurate lead. After the 911 call, the center told Madison police the dispatcher called Brittany back, and there were 2 males heard on her line. So this was what they initially focused on. 2 weeks later, when the center reviewed their call logs, they found out that there were 2 separate calls that the dispatcher made and reached 2 men on a completely different hang-up call, which had no connection to Brittany Zimmermann's call. The 911 center also acknowledged that they could have triangulated Brittany's cell phone to 511 West Doty Street, which was a 24-unit apartment building next to her rental house on 517 West Doty. A week later, at a different press conference, Kathleen Falk said that Joe Norwick clearly misspoke when he made initial statements to the press. She would not fire him and still had confidence in his ability to run the 911 center. Apparently, the dispatcher could have started a search with Brittany's cell phone company, and in approximately 5 to 30 minutes, could have linked her name with her billing address. There had been an ongoing internal investigation, but the 911 operator had not suffered any disciplinary action, and no changes with training or procedures had been enacted. The news media learned the dispatcher was a union member and had been moved to another county. She was a 20-year veteran and asked for a transfer a month before she took Brittany Zimmermann's call. They granted her transfer shortly after taking that call on April 2nd. Kathleen Falk said the mistake had nothing to do with insufficient staffing or distractions, but didn't know if the operator was working overtime. Dane County had 59 dispatchers who handled 174,000 calls each year, with a yearly budget of $5.5 million. So we spend a lot of time indoors, breathing around 30,000 gallons of air daily. According to the EPA, indoor air could be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. And we have 4 fur kids in this house, so there's a lot of pet dander. And living in the South makes your allergies worse. Even one of our dogs developed allergies when we moved from Wisconsin to Tennessee. So what's the solution? Air Doctor, which has been featured on media outlets such as CNN, Money, ABC, and more. Air Doctor filters out contaminants and allergens, like pollen, pet dander, dust mites, and mold, so your lungs don't have to. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund, minus shipping. So head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code BEYOND, and depending on the model, you'll receive up to 39% off, or up to $300 off. Lock this special offer by going to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code BEYOND. Brittany's mother, Jean Zimmermann, chose to not comment on her daughter's case initially. But when 6 months went by and it was still unsolved, she gave her first interview to keep the attention on her daughter's case. The Zimmermanns were recently given $5,000 from a group that helps set up reward funds for families of crime victims. Friends and family helped take that reward fund from $5,000 to $10,000. Jean found it difficult to believe that no witnesses offered information, or no one saw her daughter's killer. She didn't exactly know how her daughter died, and had not been informed if there was DNA evidence. The 911 mishap was another layer on top of an already impossible situation. On the day Brittany was killed, Jean missed a call from her daughter. They spoke several times a day and were very close. Jean made an impression of her daughter's thumbprint after she died and made it into a necklace that she wore every day. Tim and Annie Olson, who were Angela Drake's parents from episode 79, sent Jean a bracelet with Brittany's name on it. The Zimmermanns weren't the only people struggling. Before Brittany was cremated, her fiancé Jordan placed her diamond engagement ring on her finger. They had picked it out before she died, but had not purchased the ring. The Zimmermanns were holding off on bringing Brittany's ashes to the cemetery because they didn't want her there by herself. When either Jean or Kevin passed, they would bury their daughter with the deceased parent. In December 2008, the Wisconsin State Journal finally got 6 police search warrants, which had been sealed by the court for months. Officials planned on extending the seals, but the lapse was an oversight. Jordan and Brittany were on campus at 11:30 a.m. on April 2, 2008. They talked on their cell phones as Jordan was on the balcony at Van Nuys and could see Brittany below. Brittany went home and around 12:20 p.m. dialed 911. She was heard screaming on the call, and there were sounds of a struggle. The 911 operator, Rita Gahan, told her supervisor that while she did hear noise and voices during Brittany's call, the scream did not register as someone in distress in her mind. Jordan discovered Brittany's body and called 911. He thought she had been shot in the chest because someone had stabbed her in the heart so many times. The medical examiner said that Brittany died from complex homicidal violence, including multiple stab wounds and strangulation. A horizontal band, consistent with ligature markings, resided over her anterior neck. One side of Brittany's face sustained a contusion. The knife was estimated to be 2 to 5 inches long, with a width of about 3/4 of an inch, and it had not been found. They dispatched police at 1:08 p.m. Jordan was trembling, in shock and crying when detectives arrived. The coroner pronounced Brittany dead at 1:34 p.m. Police took clothing, kitchen knives, computer equipment, bedding, bloody women's slippers, a paper towel with an unknown red substance, a sheet of computer paper with suspected blood drops, and 18 blood samples. Investigators also took 23 swabs for DNA, 10 fingerprints, 9 partial footwear prints, and 2 sink traps with their contents. Jordan didn't know if anything was taken from the house, but their computers were still there. Other valuables not taken included a backpack, a purse, a digital camera, an iPad, and a diamond ring. The warrants determined investigators ruled out Thomas Cosgrove and Jeffrey Ball, who were initially being looked at as suspects. Another man, 53-year-old Chauncey Mack, was also ruled out. They had arrested him in early May after getting into a fight on State Street. In January 2009, a highly edited tape of Jordan's 911 call was released to the public. Jordan's lawyer asked the judge not to release the audio, arguing that it would cause trauma to Brittany's family and friends. The city argued it might make the public less willing to dial 911. The judge rejected these arguments and thought it was important to release this call so the public could have important information about the performance of the dispatch center. But they edited the call as directed by the Madison police. They wanted to mask descriptions of the crime scene. In March 2009, the 911 call center revamped its protocols, added staff, and reduced overtime. Director Joe Norwick resigned from all the criticism over the Brittany Zimmermann call and his lack of 911 experience. John DeYoung was hired as the new director and brought along 12 years of 911 experience from Minneapolis. During his time in Minnesota, he oversaw a replacement of the center's computer-aided dispatch system. City officials thought he would be the ideal person to help revamp Madison's 911 computer system. Another issue with the call center was their inability to provide basic metrics about the effectiveness of the call center, like average ring time or total annual call volume. After Brittany's murder, that data was collected and published monthly. 911 operator Rita Gahan eventually received a few days suspension for mishandling the call. Keith and Jean Zimmerman sued Dane County, which was settled in November 2010. The county agreed to contribute $5,000 to the family's reward fund and paid $2,500 of their attorney's fees. As a part of the settlement, Dane County admitted no fault in the matter. The Zimmermans also sued Wisconsin management and the owners of the rental building where Brittany lived on Doty Street. Their argument was over building code violations, which made it easier for Brittany's killer to enter the apartment. This lawsuit was settled out of court. In December 2010, Brittany Zimmerman's case took a strange turn. Madison police wouldn't make an official comment, but when the Wisconsin State Journal reviewed hundreds of pages of police and court documents, police were examining a potential link between Brittany Zimmerman's case and a break-in that took place at the Blue Moon Bar and Grill on the Madison's Near West Side on July 9, 2008. The Madison teenagers who broke into the bar had gang ties. A fingerprint found on the window of the bar matched to Spencer Hutchins. Spencer then implicated his friends, Darielle Banks and Ryan Cook. Police believe that there was a fourth person involved in the break-in, and this person was also somehow involved in Brittany Zimmerman's murder. DNA was found on the inside of a plexiglass window, but it did not match the three teens. April 2013 marked the 5th year of Brittany's case going unsolved. Jean Zimmerman believed that the three teens convicted for the Blue Moon break-in knew who killed her daughter. But this connection ultimately never panned out. On June 16, 2016, an unsealed search warrant confirmed that there was a DNA match in the Brittany Zimmerman case. Back on December 9, 2014, the state crime lab had confirmed the DNA taken from the right sleeve of Brittany's shirt matched David Kahl, who had initially been interviewed because he was running scams in Brittany's neighborhood the day she was killed. This DNA match led detectives to interview Andrew Scholes, who was a friend of David Kahl's, and said Kahl confessed to killing Brittany Zimmerman. Scholes had a 2010 felony marijuana possession conviction. In 2014, he served 20 months in West Virginia for a gun possession by a felon. He was released from prison in October 2015. Scholes refused to give Madison police detailed information about Brittany's murder because he wanted to cut a deal. The 38-year-old needed a presidential pardon and even emailed Jean Zimmerman, asking her to write to President Barack Obama on his behalf. Scholes wanted his record expunged so he wouldn't have to give up his gun collection that was confiscated by the police. On August 5, 2017, 39-year-old Andrew Scholes died from injuries he sustained from a motorcycle crash. He had been in the hospital since July 20th. Scholes drove his motorcycle at a high rate of speed, lost control, and hit a curb. He hit several trees and posts before he was thrown from the bike. Police didn't have answers, but David Kahl was not going anywhere, as he was serving a 3-year sentence at Oshkosh Correctional for racking up a 7th DUI charge. On March 20th, 2020, 53-year-old David Kahl was charged with Brittany Zimmerman's murder. Police had interviewed him 6 times over the start of the case until December 2014. The details he gave police varied from interview to interview. He said that he had been at Brittany's apartment, but then he couldn't remember if he was there. Police had also received a letter from an inmate at Fox Lake Correctional back in 2009, where Kahl had also been housed. The letter pointed fingers at another inmate for Brittany Zimmermann's murder, but curiously enough, Kahl's DNA was found on the envelope of that letter. Kahl was getting ready to be released from prison right before the homicide charges were laid at his feet. He completed an early release program called the Earned Release Program, which was a substance abuse treatment program for nonviolent offenders. A judge canceled Kahl's early release, and he remained in jail in Oshkosh. His bond was set at $1 million. In March 2021, a competency exam was ordered because Kahl's lawyers questioned his ability to assist them in preparing his defense. David Kahl was deemed competent to stand trial in Brittany Zimmermann's murder in June 2021. In November 2021, he completed his DUI prison sentence and was transferred from Oshkosh to Madison, where he waited for his murder trial. On October 28, 2022, David Kahl took a deal and pleaded guilty to the murder. Investigators and the public were about to learn the full picture of what happened to Brittany Zimmermann. On April 2, 2008, Brittany left her class at 11:30 a.m. She was at home by 12 p.m. and was using her computer to look at a UW financial aid website. She was active on her computer until 12:18 p.m. when her computer usage stopped. Brittany placed a call to 911 from her cell phone at 12:19 p.m. When a 911 call center supervisor reviewed the tape, Brittany could be heard screaming at the beginning of the call, followed by muffled sounds of voices before the call was disconnected. Her fiancé, Jordan, had a class from 12:05 to 12:55 p.m. He rode his moped back to their apartment and noticed their lock had been broken. Someone had kicked open their door. Jordan walked into their apartment, went into the living room towards the bedroom, and found Brittany lying on the floor. He dialed 911 from a cell phone, and they received his call at 1:06 p.m. Dean Kahl had been working scams in the area that day. He was at 502 West Wilson Street, trying to hustle student residents and convince them he needed $40 because his wife had a flat tire on the west side of town. A male who was walking his dog said he didn't have any money, but he would give him a ride when he returned. Kahl appeared to be jittery, according to this witness. When the witness returned with his dog, Kahl was already on another porch, trying to work a scam. At 11:50 a.m., Kahl was at 519 West Wilson Street, then moved on to 118 South Bedford Street at 12 p.m. He had been unsuccessful, so he visited 526 West Doty Street at 12:05 p.m. At 12:15 p.m., he was at 551 West Doty Street. When he had no luck there, he was seen heading east, which would have been near Brittany Zimmermann's apartment on 517 West Doty Street. In a jailhouse call he placed to his mother on October 22nd, Kahl admitted he broke into Brittany Zimmermann's house when he was high. He had not intended to harm anyone and said Brittany was a kind person. Kahl used her restroom, and when he came out, she was on the phone with 911. He was paranoid about the call, and he lost it. Kahl got behind her, knocked the phone out of her hand, and broke it in half. He took her to the bedroom, threw her down on the bed, grabbed a t-shirt, and tried to strangle her. When that didn't work, he went to the kitchen and got a knife. He stabbed her 19 times. Kahl then stopped at 380 West Washington Avenue, which would have been the Maharani Indian restaurant back in 2008, and he used the restroom there. He went to 525 West Washington, rang the doorbell twice, and walked in the front door. Kahl asked the female resident for $40 to fix his tire. She refused to give him money and told him to leave, which he did. The resident waited 10 minutes, contemplating what took place, and dialed 911 at 1:13 p.m. At 119 North Bedford at 2 p.m., Kahl asked the resident for money. The resident gave him $20, and Kahl gave the resident his Department of Corrections offender ID card that contained his name and photo. This was handed over to the police later that day. At 6:11 p.m., Kahl went to 114 North Franklin Street, where he lived. He was picked up by a detective and transported to the police department, where they interviewed him. This was the first of a series of interviews that took place over a few years. Kahl told the police how he went door to door, running his $40 spare tire ruse. He made money especially by scamming women. Kahl surprised them at their apartments or rental houses, and he pitched his $40 sob story. He said women were easy marks because many did not lock their doors. He admitted to being high on crack cocaine that day and handing over his DOC card to someone, which he had only done because he was high. Kahl admitted to ringing every single doorbell on West Doty Street. He told detectives he met up with someone named Hank at a crack house at 424 West Wilson Street. In some interviews, Kahl said he went to the Paradise Bar on West Main Street, where he purchased more crack. He admitted to meeting up with Hank and Mitchell at the Echo Tap at 1 p.m. on April 2, 2008, about the time Jordan discovered his fiancée Brittany was dead. Kahl said they split up after leaving the Echo Tap. If any listeners of this podcast have ever been to the Dice or Echo Tap, especially in the 90s or the aughts, you know that the underbelly of Madison sometimes visited those establishments to buy drugs. So some elements of David Kahl's story were likely true. Different variations of the story were given throughout the years, but Kahl consistently pointed police in the direction of Hank and Mitchell. He helped police make composite sketches of these men. Kahl said Hank and Mitchell were committing thefts and burglaries, even crawling through windows to get into college kids' apartments. And it was the 911 call fiasco that led investigators down the path of looking for two men who they thought committed the crime. While David Kahl was not considered a suspect at the beginning of the investigation, police performed an oral swab for DNA purposes. Detectives also noticed he had small cuts on the palm of his hand. In court, under the terms of the plea agreement, the prosecution promised to not contest a petition from Kahl for extended supervision if he pleaded guilty and served 20 years in prison. On January 21, 2003, the judge sentenced 56-year-old David Kahl to life in prison with no chance of parole. Kahl said, "I would like to apologize to everybody, especially the Zimmermann family. I took away Brittany's 21-year-old life, a family that she could have had, and I'm accepting the punishment that I've got coming." A victim impact statement was written by Brittany's father, Kevin, and read by a family friend. He thought Wisconsin should have the death penalty for people like David Kahl. Kevin recalled how two police officers and a chaplain showed up at his door to tell him that his daughter had been murdered. And I had to tell Jean, when she walked into our house, that her beautiful daughter, best friend in the world, was taken from us. Kevin thought about her every time they went to a wedding or heard about people becoming grandparents, knowing that Brittany had been engaged and wanted to have children. Brittany's aunt, Kim Haig, rejected Kahl's assertions that he'd taken responsibility. She referenced Kahl's jailhouse confessions and said his decision to plead guilty was about not wanting to put his mother through the emotional pain of her son being on trial. There's never been a moment that this has been about us. This has been about him from the first day, the first lie. He has had 15 years of freedom, in which we have had zero freedom in all reality. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much, everyone.